The big word that I like to focus on is adoption. This AI stuff is civilizational. And what I mean by civilizational is if you have a society that can literally lean into this with all it has, even though it may have less performant AI, but just says, look, we're going all in and just turn it on in every aspect of life, you're going to see a whole different environment. I'm reminded of when the Germans in the 1930s came to the United States, invited, of course, and we thought they wanted to see our amazing military academies and things like that. They didn't want to see any of that. And what they really wanted to look at was Ford Motor Company, and they wanted to see like the industrialization that had gone on, because they were imagining like what they would need, because they had other thoughts. So in 2016, when we went around and looked at Uber and Waymo and these other places, we were inspired. In 2025, you're not going to go to an American company and ask yourself what the future is going to be. You're going to go to China. Now, to me, this is, again, getting back to that civilizational aspect. This is very concerning.
This is Daniel Fagelli. You're tuned in to The Trajectory, and this is the third episode in our US-China AGI Relations series. We heard from Jack Shanahan, who ran the Joint AI Center for the DoD. Our previous perspective was from the Harris brothers of Gladstone, and we speak today with Drew Cukor. Drew once ran Project Maven within the Department of Defense. He is a colonel. And he then went on into the financial services world and is now head of data and AI transformation at TWG Global, which is a holding company that operates in a number of different sectors and spaces. We speak this week around one component of sort of the competition between the U.S. and China that is not related to war, and that is simply the technological and economic competition, the preeminent importance of adopting the technology and leveraging it if a country wants to sort of uphold its own values and be strong enough on a global stage, it surely must be using the most advanced tools. Drew makes a pretty interesting case for why that is and what he thinks executives should be doing about it, in addition to what he thinks regulators should be doing about it. I will save my comments for the end of this episode. So without further ado, let's fly right in. This is Drew Cukor here on The Trajectory. So Drew, welcome to the show.
Hello. It's great to be here with your audience and yourself. This is fun.
It's been an awfully long time since we riffed, and you've been able to see the cutting edge of this stuff in, the biggest organization in the world is the DoD, and you're running some pretty fun stuff. And now you've been able to work in some other big and exciting organizations, including where you are now. Obviously, in either case, public or private sector, there's a consideration around sort of the direction of where we're going with China. I think, they had their national AI plan, 10, 11 years ago. Now it really feels much more like a race. When you kind of talk to leadership, whether these are policy folks, military folks, business folks, and kind of frame what this dynamic is of this grand AI racing between the US and China, what's crucial for people to understand? How do you frame it mentally?
Yeah, look, the big word that I like to focus on is adoption. And because this AI stuff is civilizational.
Oh, yeah.
And what I mean by civilizational is if you have a society that can literally lean into this with all it has, even though it may have less performant AI, but just says, look, we're going all in and just turn it on in every aspect of life.
Yeah.
You're going to see a whole different environment. So let me explain. So when we started Project Maven, which was, I know we'll maybe get a moment on that.
Yeah, go for it, please, by all means.
I was directed at the time by very senior leaders in the Pentagon, to go out and look around, and it was really exciting to go into a lot of American companies and see the outlines of what the future might hold. I was reminded, in military reading and things about how, different enterprising individuals have gone and leaned into industry to see like what the future could be. And then you bring your sort of mindset to like, okay, I would do it this way, I'd reorganize. And then you go back into your institution. I'm reminded of when the Germans in the 1930s came to the United States, invited, of course, and we thought they wanted to see our amazing military academies and things like that. They didn't want to see any of that. In fact, I think actually the way it was described is they kind of laughed at the way we train officers. And what they really wanted to look at was Ford Motor Company, and they wanted to see like the industrialization that had gone on, because they were imagining like what they would need, because they had other thoughts. So in 2016, when we went around and looked at, Uber and Waymo and these other places, we were inspired. I just want to say in 2025, you're not going to go to an American company and ask yourself what the future is going to be. You're going to go to China. And you're going to want to walk around the streets of China, and you want to see what they've done there. Now, unfortunately, I've not been to China, and I don't believe I'll ever go to China, frankly.
Yeah. You got a couple barriers there.
I've got some constraints, but I've certainly read and talked to many who have.
Yeah.
And the overwhelming view is if you want to see what it looks like in a fully AI-enabled society, a civilization, the United States is not the place to get inspired. Now, to me, this is, again, getting back to that civilizational aspect, this is very concerning. We have, obviously, all of the DNA for this AI revolution. We have spent a lot of time building. We've got great universities, great companies. But when it comes to adoption, we're falling behind. And in fact, we could obviously spend lots of time talking about what the constraints are to adoption. We have the compute, we have the greatest AI inventors, we have many of those necessary ingredients. But when it comes to full all-in adoption, where society just absorbs it and just changes dynamically, and through that change recreates itself, we are not the place for that right now.
Definitely not.
This is the gap. This is the concern that I would offer to everyone: is where do you go to get insight on what the future of financial services is in AI? Where do you get the view of what the future of driving on streets and interacting with every service and capability? It's not the United States, and that's the main thing that we want to be talking about.
Yeah, well, it's okay. So adoption is certainly part of the mix here. I think there's obviously components of adoption that we famously are not as interested in, right? I mean, so part of the adoption is you can pretty well enforce it. I mean, every private sector company in China is essentially an arm of the CCP, and there's a lot that goes along with that. But we don't do that with our own companies in America, and I think very few people advocate for it. Similarly, scanning your eyeballs to get on the subway or whatever, a lot of those conveniences are also under the guise of a certain degree of control over travel and vocation and lending and other kinds of things that they do due to sort of party loyalty, which I think very few Americans would be congenial with. Some of the uses of cameras for, doing whatever they do with Uyghurs, which people could go on Google if they wanted, probably we would see as less than ideal. So there's a degree of top-downness that they can force. Some of it surely comes from enthusiasm and inventiveness, for sure. But there's a certain degree by force, and then there's certain degrees of that that are sort of less inspiring. What are the components for you that are most inspiring? In terms of like where you think, well, let me actually frame, instead of inspiring, because the focus here is the USAI kind of race. Not that I want to insinuate more friction than there already is, but we want to focus on sort of what's going on there. What are the places where you feel like behind really is behind? It's not like, behind because we don't want to do that, because there's plenty of that. What are the behind where we really should be there? It would make for a faster, better society, better innovation. It would work very well with our values and freedoms here. What for you is most essential in that regard? Yeah, again, the place to go to be inspired is not the United States, it's China. And the reason for that, and look, we could talk all day about using AI as a means for state control. And certainly, societies that are authoritarian will use technology to whatever means it takes to accomplish their political goals. Yeah. But putting that on the bookshelf and talk about the non-state control. What for you feels like we're not doing it and they are?
what happens is when you have a society that is embracing without the constraints of, say, the due diligence aspects that you're mentioning, and it's just all in, and everyone recognizes its power and are excited about it, the net effects of all of those collisions that are happening, in terms of, say, what's happening in financial services and what's happening in insurance and what's happening in everyday life when you go to the store and market, like all of those things just spinning and moving around creates all of these sort of unnatural collisions where software engineers and data scientists are all interacting, and they're creating sort of this new culture, right? Which is this symbiotic relationship between humans and machines. And when you have an environment, say, for example, what's happening in China, right, the PRC, where you just have sort of all of this stuff moving so quickly, you're going to see the net effect of that being very different than a culture that's going slowly, that's adopting an incremental piecemeal way, that is concerned about the ethical pieces or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that I'm most concerned about. Again, military officers going and wanting to be inspired about how that will back propagate into a military context. I'm afraid, like, there are parts in the United States, it's just not what it was in 2016 when we started Maven. And I'm afraid that when I talk to anyone, if you want to be truly inspired, read about everything that's happening in China and then take that back and then now imagine what the future would be when all of that interconnect, all of that stuff is banging around and creates a new synthesis of humanity and machines working in amazing ways. And look, that's concerning because this is where we're talking about American competitiveness. Yeah. When all of a sudden the light is not here and it's in another place, right? You're going to start to see, right, issues, right? You're going to see us falling behind. And look, we're not terribly behind, but we're far enough behind where I'm here talking to you about this and saying, look, we should be concerned about this. And what is it from a regulatory perspective? What is it about an adoption perspective here? What is happening within our own industries where we're lagging and we're slowing? This is the concern, right? Is frankly American competitiveness.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think the supposition, if I'm picking up what you're putting down, and this is common stuff, is, if our relative power in the world is wildly diminished and a huge bulk of sort of economic and technological power sits somewhere else, then sort of maybe the values we hold dear will be in a little bit of a shaky spot. And maybe the ability for other powers to wield influence in other spheres of the world, maybe not mainland initially, but other spheres of the world might be higher. And that sort of the relative position of the great powers is due in large part to sort of how well they're wielding this next wave of technology. And obviously China doesn't have the option of a next wave of humans because of their demographic issues. And so they're going all in for a variety of reasons. They also, they have a single emperor who can wield every company within the nation towards a singular goal. So they have some advantages we don't have, no doubt about that. And they're also backed against a particular kind of demographic corner. So you're kind of painting, hey, here's our table stakes. Great, gotcha. You're also saying, in somewhat open-ended terms, I'm going to kind of fill in some of the open-endedness, and you tell me if I'm using the wrong kind of use cases. I just want to make sure I'm following you, and more importantly, the audience is following you. I think what you're saying is, hey, Dan, you take a nation where the banks are way more efficient with lending and lending money to kind of the right folks, who are lower risk, maybe faster. You can get more entrepreneurship fostered. And if you have more entrepreneurship, more other good stuff happen. And similarly, if people get insurance, who should be getting insurance in order to like run something and do something productive in the world, that's great. And if there's less fraud in that world because we've used AI to kind of be able to buffer against that fraud, that's a hell of a lot of savings for kind of everybody in that damn society. And now there's all kinds of things that are working better. And if the inventory management is managed by AI and sort of everything in manufacturing is just 2 or 3% faster, well, that spins down to what the consumers are paying and everything else. When you say data, waking up, banging around, I filled in the blank with what I just said. Would you fill in the blank with something other than what I just said?
Yeah, of course. I think you're right on. Speed, accuracy, delight. Those are the three conditions that humans all want from machines. They need unbelievable accuracy. They're not willing to accept human levels of accuracy. They want speed. No one wants to sit around and wait for the answer. And they want to be delighted. And every pursuit in business is going to be dominated by speed, accuracy, delight. And then you could add on to, inside of delight is just surprising and amazing results that are new and innovative. And so if you can bring that to everything, even to older kinds of business pursuits that are just boring, right? Like going to the store and buying whatever you need and then going back to your apartment and just making it faster. The exchange, delightsome, but not having a ton of labor to get that done. Like every business pursuit, every use case that you listed off, if it just brings that, and if a whole civilization is in that pursuit, and all of those use cases are all banging around, everything from the mundane of walking across the street and to getting into your lift to go up to the apartment, to driving a car, to making your purchases, all of that. Just think of every single walk of life is better, faster, and delightful. It just changes the entire dynamic, right, of how we interact with machines.
And what's being insinuated here, and again, I'm filling in blanks, so you let me know if I'm filling in the wrong ones. What's being insinuated here is, and if all that delight and efficiency and speed and improvement in quality and all that is happening all the time, then presumably that will make for a stronger civilization that can kind of uphold itself and maybe be less permeable to other kinds of risks and issues. So when I frame sort of, hey, how do you think about the U.S. AI race? I'm somewhat patently, obviously, asking people to answer through the pair of goggles they're wearing, right? If I was asking you and you were in the public sector, you have a different answer. Now you got a different employer, you got to say stuff you got to say. So we get different perspectives, knowing that people are kind of they're in whatever seat they're in at the time. But with that said, different people give different angles. Some people will say, hey, when I think about the US AI race, a lot of this is around IP. We got to prevent all the wild and wacky IP theft. I mean, we've had Mike Brown on a couple times. I'm sure you know of Mike's work and whatnot. And then there's other folks that are really looking at how much maybe Chinese nationals sort of within the bigger labs within the U.S. is kind of a major issue in terms of like that IP sort of leaving from the big Western labs. There's others who talk about kind of the direct military applications. It sounds like the angle you're taking is, hey, when I'm framing it, thinking about it in my current life, Dan, as Drew Cukor in the private sphere, currently, financial services, you've been hanging out for quite a while now. You're saying adoption is a part of this this race that we need to be seeing as well. It is those other things, but it is also, do we have a civilization that's cruising on this and is symbiotically more powerful as a result? Am I putting words in your mouth, or is this a correct distillation?
No, and look, you remember our phrase, O to D, the offense to defense and defense to offense. A lot of the things you're enumerating and going through there are fundamentally defensive things. And, I came up a Marine, spent 30 years in uniform. I don't like to be in anyone's tailpipe, ever. Okay? And, I'm not going to say I don't like to lose, but honestly, I don't want to be in someone's tailpipe. And we can talk defensive measures all day long. Let's, TikTok this and TikTok that. And by TikTok, I mean, like, turn it off in the United States and find an alternative.
Yeah.
And I get it. And TikTok obviously is kind of a double meaning, right? Time, you're ending.
Yeah.
That's remember good. What Mike Gallagher did with TikTok. So you could TikTok everything, reduce the university presence, limit GPU. Like, I'm here to tell you that what wins this race is adoption. And if in the United States we have business leaders that don't know what's coming, which is a wave of new ways of interacting with machines that are faster, more accurate, and delightful. I don't care how much you protect our shores from new cars and new devices and new phones, and you just name your consumer item.
Yeah.
They are going. The public is going to demand, and if we are still stuck in adopting at the rates we're doing now, while another country is adopting far faster, it won't matter how many defensive things we have. So this gets back to American competitiveness. And the call here is, if you are a CEO, you are probably going to be the last generation that presides over human-only organizations. Your future is going to be a 30-70, 60-40 mix of AI and humans. And I'm telling you that there's another country that's looking at a future of far different ratios in every walk of life. This is an adoption play. This is not defensive. Other people can do the defensive work.
Totally.
Our conversation is
Yep.
why
it's
are we
great.
not adopting
It's
that?
great. Well, so to your point, I don't think there's anybody that says, man, if only the IP theft stuff stopped, everything would be okay. I don't think there's many people with that. With that position. But I think different people have different focus areas. And I certainly will not write off the totality of defense. I don't know if you are. I don't think you are. But I will say, I think the brunt of it has to be the core strength of the civilization and it wielding it. So I actually don't think there's many arguments against that. I think at the end of the day, the relative ability to wield the expansive potential of a civilization surely has to be the bedrock that everything else sits on. And yes, in my opinion, there should be other concerns and other things. But to your point, I think it's great to actually point out this has got to be one of our primaries. So with that said, we kind of lead into best case, worst cases. It sounds like the worst case that maybe you might articulate is there's some nation out there really wielding huge ratios of kind of human to massive amounts of machine labor. Making consumers happy, but also being super efficient, inventing new things in sort of iterative, powerful loops that eventually just is able to sort of wield whatever influence it wants to over us because we can do naught but cower before the power of their financial and their manufacturing and their industries. Is this sort of the worst case that is important for us to discuss today, Drew?
Yeah. So look, there was a professor at UCLA that wrote this iconic book, Guns, Germs, and
Yes.
And we all studied this, and the primary thesis I'm probably going to get wrong, but I'll tell you what I took away from it.
Great.
And this is the same reason for the race to Mars and for establishing a lunar space station and getting into space. If you are not challenging your culture and civilization, and again, I'm returning to the point that AI is a civilizational matter.
Yep. Oh, I'm right there with you. Yeah,
and if you want the United States, its values and all that, which I believe deeply in, I've, frankly spent 30 years of my life, my youth, and a lot of my health in the defense of, the values that we have accrued and built up in this country over, 250 years, frankly.
Yep.
I believe that the civilization that I would like all of humanity to enjoy is the civilization that we built. Now, in the thesis that Mr. Diamond introduces in his book, it's essentially one where, nations that are more advanced collide with nations that are less advanced. And what happens in those interactions, which is often horrible and terrible, and we know the stories of colonialism and things. I'm not here to support those.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But what I am here to say is the following. A nation that evolves into a symbiotic AI relationship, machines and humans, that nation doesn't need to land on shores in the traditional sort of imperial way.
Mm-hmm.
It is literally the ideas, it is the technology that will start seeping in. And before you know it, our banks will be competing with their banks and we'll be behind. And our supermarkets will compete with their And so this is why we want to go to Mars first, because once we land in Mars, our civilization will be forever changed. And we will bring back knowledge and insights. And this is the same thing that will happen, that's happening now with AI. As people interact and the civilizational changes happen, your civilization progresses and evolves far faster than one that isn't. But look, it isn't just about raw compute. It isn't just about defensive measures. It's adoption.
Totally,
and our industry has got to get that moving. Otherwise, we're going to suddenly find ourselves infected by another civilization that will land here and will be far further than we are.
Well, this is the tough part. I mean, there's so much to unpack here. So I love the idea of, hey, there's a lot of defensive concerns, but it's got to sit on a bedrock of ultimately the level of, I got to use my own phraseology here, but the potential of the civilization that we're sitting on. And the issue with adoption they are myriad. It's not just, oh, those bad regulators that want to babysit everybody. I don't think all regulation is necessarily evil here. I think some is ridiculous. Some may be helpful, but I think a lot of it is, frankly, enterprises. I mean, you work in financial services. We do a hell of a lot. Everybody that sells AI into financial services, from Deloitte to Microsoft and beyond, we run campaigns. We look at where buyers and sellers meet. Right, that's literally my life. And so, lots of reasons for not moving. And namely, when you're an outside company, there's a lot of motivation to say, hey, let's change big, yada, yada, because you're going to get kind of paid through the whole project. When you're inside an organization, it's like, man, if I stick my neck out, how much of a raise am I really going to get if this works out? Versus, like the risk reward is rough there. And the way I see it, and this is not pessimism, by the way, this is just, I'm looking at reality, right? When you just stated what happens when a more powerful and less powerful nations meet each other, you weren't saying, because I have this horrible view of the world. No, you're just telling me what reality is. So in my opinion, reality in enterprise adoption is, unless like a startup or a much more nimble peer is devouring my lunch in a way that I can feel tangibly, real wholesale change of insurance underwriting, real wholesale change around how we even think of call centers from the ground floor up, real wholesale change of how we stock our shelves, not really going to be on the radar. And so this is kind of an unfortunate factoid of what enterprise AI adoption looks like. When you think about shaking execs out of this, I mean, you and I can have our talk and we can say the things, and I'm with you, actually. I think adoption is mandated if we're to maintain relative strength. And I think there are some benefits to be accrued here, quite obviously. But man, how do we shake out of that darn slumber? Because enterprises are the way they are.
Yeah, well, think of, the big word here is the C word, complacency. Risk averse.
Yeah, you betcha.
A lack of a bias for action.
You betcha.
And look, we used to pride ourselves on taking moonshots and being aggressive and pushing hard. And, when you get tons of money coming through the window and it's just because you've been sitting on a almost monopolistic pipeline, it's hard to reinvent yourself. Now, let's be clear. I'm talking about education. Like, honestly,
that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one.
The whole education system in the United States is lovely, and we have built everything that we're resting upon because of amazing educators and a public system and private system that's done well. But the resistance to using AI and the concern, like, we need to reinvent, because this stuff is here. And until we can figure out education and get that set, we've got an entire generation that's going to be doing AI in the dark, because they're using it at night.
Oh, of course.
And realigning curriculum and rethinking machines are here. And all right, so let's start there. And then, of course, then I'm talking to corporate leaders. And I'm basically saying, look, at the end of the day, you have got to lead this. You have got to push. You've got to make those investments. You've got to be willing to take risk. And you have to imagine what the future looks like. And frankly, I feel, and I can see this, I'm in Santa Monica here. I'm watching a great company, Google, drive their Waymo cars around. And it's amazing. We're seeing a space-age vehicle drive with no driver. You literally order it up. But everywhere else in this city, I see no indications of AI anywhere. It is the old processes at every single store, every interaction. And I don't believe, and having not been to China, nor will I be traveling there recently, but I'm certainly talking with many who have, reading everything I can, the entire way everything is done is vastly different.
Yeah, and Shanghai is a different airport experience and a different hotel experience than Manhattan, no doubt about that.
So complacency, and a lot of corporate leaders are waiting for when the magic moment drops and everything is just handed to them. And look, I'll be the first to tell you that private always beats enterprise. When we go home and we use our private AI capabilities, like myself, I have amazing capabilities. I walk into the enterprise and no question that it's just not there. And we just wonder why it's not. And, of course, private beats enterprise, but it's just because of security and other concerns. But there has to be a moment here where we're just like all in. And that is what's missing.
Yeah. So this is great because you're framing this. We'll get into kind of what you hope regulators and innovators do. for you, it's embracing within the enterprise. Again, the incentives are really rough. I mean, there's also the whole thing about kind of a relative level of executive AI fluency. You're absolutely right. A good deal of this has to come from the top, right? Because AI is not like IT. It's really more like R&D a lot of the time. We're waking up the value of data. We're doing probabilistic things, not deterministic things. We've got to be willing to iterate here. We've got to be willing to play a different game than plugging in some slightly customized version of SAP. We've got to. It looks, smells, and feels different in every single way. Yes. So execs being like, well, I am excited about AI, and then they go in without the fluency. Of course, there's a lot of flops that come from that too. So tons of challenges, but we need it. We need it in the enterprise to get out of complacency. But you're also bringing it up. We need cities to think about this. We need education to think about this. I think education is a great point, because when I look out into the world of educators, or even in the world of the arts, primarily, I just see a massive sacrilege response to it. Well, of course, the humans always know better, and of course, this is just a bastardizing effect. Yeah. When I think education is mostly caught up, I mean, maybe in some college areas, with the fact that the internet is real, right? You don't have to memorize everything. But maybe there's probably some places where even you're being taught in a way where it's not relevant since 1650. But leveling that up for AI also seems really important. So for you, it's education, it's the local level, it's the national level, it's the enterprises. It's sort of like how to kindle the enthusiasm for real use and real transformation across this whole spectrum. Are there parts of that you're most excited about as beginners of that kindling?
Look, this is almost like the horse and the car, and how quickly that adoption worked.
Really fast.
And it became obvious. Why do I need 30 million horses when I can have a car that gives me way more reliability? I don't have to have a stable of horses to get me to work and back, right? I don't have to have all of this infrastructure to clean up after them and feed them and just
crazy.
And so, look, take for example, education. And look, I'm a product of American public schools. And I came with all of the, lackadaisicalness that came as being a product of the 70s and 80s, where most of us thought the world was going to get wiped out. And so, we didn't have a lot of valedictorians in my class, nor did we even take AP tests or classes, right? But I came through and I worked hard. I did the best I could. But look, honestly, where are the programs in American universities that are basically saying the next tranche of teachers have got to understand that AI is here? And there is an entirely new learning process that needs to happen. Yeah. Where are the new education programs that are going to say, you're turning on a transformer in kindergarten, and you're going to be integrating with a computer for the rest of your life? Where is that happening, and how to add the human value on top of machines? Yeah. And then the same conversation happens in every aspect of human life. And that's the key that has to happen, is almost a space race, right? Where we are basically, as a society, all in on machines and humans interacting together. Because I'm here to tell you that if we're not, there is another civilization that is all in. And they're going to surprise us in about 10 years. And we're all going to be opening devices that are going to start first in Mandarin. Okay?
Yeah.
And, I loved drones. And I love flying my DJI drones, and it's probably another TikTok moment that's going to happen there one day.
I think so.
I get into the multi-menus in that, and suddenly it's in Mandarin, and that's when it sinks in your head, this is great tech, but we're not leading it anymore.
Absolutely,
English isn't the language. And then, of course, the announcement last week. We've been following this for a while, where Huawei is introducing a new operating system for computers that's going to compete directly with Windows and Linux. And it's just when are we going to realize that that's going to be coded with a civilizational perspective of the Chinese culture?
Yeah.
And so this is for real. And frankly, I am the adoption guy.
I like it.
It's adoption. And where are we?
Look, at the end of the day, couldn't say it's the only Lego piece. Very hard to argue that it might not be the most important, though. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you on that. I mean, I push forward in regular enterprise every single day for a living for the last decade. I'm aware of those barriers, but I love the fact that you're talking about this full circle of where this needs to start. The whole picture of thinking about society differently. I think this is a crucial vantage point, frankly. And so the best case for you is we're able to kind of develop this symbiosis and really be able to move forward and stay strong and have our own technology and our own sovereignty and our own values, et cetera. Again, I would say the values that would be baked into these devices wouldn't even so much be Chinese culture as CCP culture, which is a little bit of a different shebang there. If you're breaking up of the olds, the five olds or what have you, right? I mean, there's plenty that hasn't made its way into the present administration from the Tang Dynasty, but there's a huge argument here, and the best case again that you're painting is this stronger nation that we need to turn into. I think this is an extremely salient and important message. When you think about, one little quick thing to drop on the table, although being a private sector guy, it's impossible for you to be able to talk about this, I imagine. There's sort of a ratio of, hey, you'll have 30% to 70%, human to machine. There's going to be some places where it'll be, 5 to 95. There is always the question of like, well, how long are you the boss actually at some point, right? I think these questions are actually real. Doesn't mean we shouldn't adopt it. I do think that the symbiosis, maybe I'll have a horse and a car. It's like, oh, that lasts for like, geez, how long did that last for? And so in my opinion, if we're honest, I think there might be a civilizational transition of sort of where the locus of volition and sentience and power actually sits outside of wetware, but that's totally its own shebang. With that said, though, clearly staying strong, very important. As you think about this from the public sector and the private sector, having that full sphere. When you look out at the innovators and you look out at the folks that are doing the regulation, what do you hope both those parties do more or less of in, the coming 18 months, 2 years ahead, where this really crucial takeoff moment kind of should be happening? What for you matters most in that best case, worst case?
Yeah, I mean, the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Yep, lots of respect there.
Produced the AI risk management framework, and they're still actually working through that. Industry best practices. The thing I hate is when people invent things and then foist it on everyone. What has to happen is best practices emerge through the use of the technology, and then they're codified, and then we all engage and agree to them. And then regulators take that NIST document that emerged, not invented.
Yeah.
Some policymaker didn't say, I think, or I believe, I have a feeling about this, and then totally. Sentences in there that are based on zero facts, right? And
absolutely dangerous. Yeah, very, very counterproductive.
We want these things to emerge through the interaction, again, civilizational, right? We're doing, there's something happened here. We've learned, we capture that, we get enough learning, we put that in a document, we all agree to it, and then we're following. We do not want to prevent something by anticipating something and then thinking, let's come up with a bunch of ideas on how to stop this, because that's just again, another civilization's not doing that, okay?
Yeah.
And before you know it, we find ourselves a decade or two behind. Emerging concepts, emerging things that come from real life application, measure outcomes, determine how those outcomes are performed, go back, and that becomes the basis. And look, I find the regulatory community, and again, regulator interactions are, of course, governed by very specific things, so I can't speak very openly. But I have engaged with regulators for a long time, and frankly, most of them agree with this. They are 100%, let's find that standard that emerges, let's not invent a bunch of stupid things, and then we'll measure you on the basis of you following those common standards. So I believe in this country, we're generally aligned. Where the issues emerge isn't necessarily always the regulator community. It's the interpretation of what the regulators want. And then inside of American enterprise, we have what I call horse whisperers. I have people that are interpreting what they think regulators want, and they completely jam up a company.
Oh, yeah.
You've got to get in there with a machete and cut that stuff out. And that's really where the friction is, because regulators, they want to know what you think, and then they'll look at how you design your enterprise. And then they'll come in and say, okay, you wrote this policy document, we're not here to judge it, but what we are here to do is see if you're following what you say you're doing. And that's where you get in trouble. It's
Yeah.
that point. But look, I think the biggest point is I think we already have a well-set approach in the United States, and that is emerging mistakes are then codified. They're put in a document. We agree to it as an industry, and then we follow what we follow that, and then regulators come in with those documents and judge us on how we're doing.
This makes a lot of sense, and I think really there are a lot of interesting case-by-case things. Some people are like, well, do I just hurl this chatbot to become my child's teacher and best friend all day, every day? Like, there hasn't been an accident with it yet. Should I just throw it at my kid, right? Like, there's concerns that I think are like non-trivial that actually come up there. But, in terms of industry adoption, per what you're saying, like, oh, let's make sure insurance never does this one thing that one guy, it was a senator, thought of once. It's like, wait a second, is that even what goes wrong with this stuff in insurance? You talk about the horse whispers. The way we see it is like walking on eggshells. People be like, oh, I can't use Gen AI. I mean, there's a lot of HIPAA compliance stuff. Like, hey, this is like the most banal application that could never be a regulatory issue. Now all of a sudden you're just making it a problem just to like avoid all risk altogether. Like just, oh, no, I'm just avoiding it categorically. Like no regulator's going to have an issue. Your boss isn't going to have an issue. You're just like in this fearful state. So I like this horse whisperer notion that you mentioned. I want to kind of end on this point here. You're painting a world which I don't think there's that many ways to avoid it as we stand today, where two grand adversarial powers are swelling,
adopting AI
and getting stronger and stronger, and and in the last words of Alexander, to the strongest. So much of the world will go in that direction. As that occurs, we would hope to avoid kinetic war, I suspect, right? We would hope to at least have kind of like relative peace ensured by our own strength, right? Not peace because we made a kumbaya, but peace because like we're also strong. We have our own sovereignty, our own borders. We can self-sustain. What are there any sprinkled ingredients? Of course, let's just presume we're adopting well. This stuff works its way into education. Regulation is done intelligently, without a bunch of hoopla to just bar stuff just for the sake of barring it. Is there anything you hope happens between the civilizations that are becoming these giant superpowered cyborgs sharing this tiny blue marble that we're sitting on here, Drew? Is it just like, look, man, getting strong and like shooting stuff down if they fly over, like that's as good as we got? Or is it like, hey, there's certain kinds of track 2 stuff I think should be happening, or there's certain kinds of potential policy stuff where some coordination could be safe both ways and maybe would kind of keep us a little bit simpatico in the limited number of ways we can. And I think probably that'll help us from overt civilizational disaster in either case. I mean, we're just rushing to become superpowered cyborgs on a tiny marble. Anything you hope happens between those parties other than just get beefy?
Yeah. Again, let's return to the adoption theme.
Yes.
There's what I call show pony formations that quote unquote have AI. And they're meant, of course, for deterrence effects, right? You're advertising a capability that you may or may not have. It acts as deterrence or whatever. But fundamentally, let's assume adoption moves along path. We have what I call a level 5 event, which is the achievement of superhuman capability. That's AGI. I'm using Google's model where they've mapped AGI to the 5 levels of autonomous driving.
Yep.
There's a great paper on that. They update every year on this. And you have a level 5 event where you've got superhuman capability and it's a generalizable thing. And military capabilities, which often tend to lag in adoption of commercial capabilities. Let's take, for example, just computers and software and all the business in the 90s and 2000s that I lived through, where the adoption was so slow and so basic, mostly because constrained by just the systems integrators and the big vendors. We get to a point we're adopting, and then all of a sudden AI, and it's another 25 years before it makes its way into weapon systems. I just want to offer this much. Adoption is a complicated thing, and my expertise in the military, is once you start off with the technology, it's about 20 years to get this into the force and being used at a level where, the rifleman or the fighter pilot or the ship driver or the space operator is like, it's fully in the concepts. It's like we've not only adopted it, but it's like immersed in everything we do. And look, there's been a lot of documentation on this great book called Prodigal Soldier, which walks through the technology, the information technology revolution that basically birthed the modern military that we have coming out of Vietnam. They say 25 years from the technology coming in, getting it acquired, and then literally inculcating across the force. All right, so on a military perspective, where does this leave us? And of course, this is the big talking point, which is, are we talking about the existential erasure of all humankind when two great powers absorb this AI at the military level? And the place I always like to point people is a great documentary called AlphaGo. Yep. Now, AlphaGo is the story of Lee Sedol, who is a South Korean Go player at the time in the 2016 timeframe, was the greatest Go player in the world. And of course, this is a game that is so opaque and such a complex game that, unlike chess, which has been mastered, and we had all this body of work over thousands of years, Go is just considered to be just so complex because of all the different types of moves and things. You all know the story. Watch the Netflix documentary. It's a 5-game series. Of course, the machines win. Lee Sedol is defeated. But each game that's played throughout the series, the game is shorter and shorter and shorter. And so I think the last game is like 20 minutes long. Lee Sedol pulls out a win in game 4 by doing this crazy move. There's a lot of companies that are named after this famous move, and I'll leave it to your audience to go
to go Google it. Oh, that's a good cliffhanger right there.
Called Move 78, and it's the famous move where he drops the rock in the middle of the board, and the AI loses its whatever
its bearings. Yeah.
But Lee Sedol walks. Okay, so that documentary was so eye-opening to many of us who come from intelligence and the planning function, where we just suddenly realized that the entire game of Go had been reinvented. Now, the question for us right now is, will military operations be fundamentally changed by AI? And if you follow the AlphaGo reasoning, if you are playing a non-AI military play, and you're competing or you're fighting or campaigning or opposing another force that has AI, and it's not a Hollywood thing where it's just one little unit has, some computer vision going on or whatever, but it has in fact been fully absorbed by the force in all of its attributes, from logistics all the way through to the exquisite planning function that we do to execute large land, air, ground, sea, space, and cyber campaigns. If it is full, you are going to reinvent warfare.
Yeah.
And for a few minutes, you may have an advantage that is so awe-producing, very similar to what came out of Vietnam when we went into the first Gulf War and the whole world looked at the shock and awe business. And they were just like, what kind of military just came out? And it created, I think, a peace bubble for a number of decades where countries just said, I can't do that. But there will be a moment with AI where a country, a civilization has absorbed all of these factors and will have it so imbued in its formations that literally it will be an offsetting advantage, significant offsetting advantage. And the question for us, and this is for later, is what happens if it's not us? And that is really the call to action here. And it is not just a military problem. It is a banking problem. It is a supply chain. Every
across the board, education,
everything has to deliver this. The military sits on top of all that. It's an overlay of our civilization.
Yeah, it's fed by taxes, right? I mean, if there's no base, who's going to pay for the munitions? Who's going to
power, right? And the ideas. We just sit, we're an overlay on top of our civilization.
That's it.
We absorb the mechanical engineering, all the pieces, we absorb that. And so my point here is, if this is that big and it is that critical, the question becomes, okay, are we prepared for another state to suddenly assume that mantle? And I don't think we are, and we better get our stuff together.
I think it's a more than apt note to end on. It's unfortunate we're so limited on time, but that there are all the questions of does something emerge from those Google strata that you had mentioned that is even sort of beyond sort of like, oh, we're a powerful civilization. Like, well, what if when it was categorically a different, species level thing? Are we rushing into that? But certainly in the near term from adoption, having that be another nation would be a very spooky thing. And I think being able to put adoption first in this interview, I think was a very productive way to lead things. So I know that's all we have for time, but Drew, it's been a real blast after all these years to be able to chat again. And thanks so much for being able to be with us.
Thank you.
So that's all for this episode. Thank you for tuning in all the way through to the end of this episode. And a big thank you to Drew for being able to be with us here. It's been a very long time since I talked to him. He was at Maven when we chatted last, and it was cool to be able to dive in deep on some of his takes around where these competitive dynamics are taking us. And I think that there's a sort of virtue in seeing, hey, most of this sort of upholding our own values in terms of the West is less about getting into fighting stance and more about ensuring that we're healthy, able to adapt and act. And that implies having industries that are nimble and able to move. And I think Drew rightfully praised a good deal of China's openness to adoption in the public sector and private sector when it comes to AI in terms of how they do banking and electric vehicles and a number of other areas. And I think having just come back from Shanghai, there is certainly plenty that is commendable. I think many people in the United States might not want to be governed in the way that China is governed. Not that I think the United States means of governing or norms are without their own flaws, but I think there's many fewer people scrambling onto the shores of Shanghai to become Chinese citizens than the opposite. And maybe there's some things there that we'd want to protect. And I think Drew brings up a pretty fair point that, hey, a lot of that is simply just being healthy and strong enough to sustain what we're doing. And if we need military innovation, that's all based on the same support and strength of the economy as well. I dig it. And obviously Drew is now in the private sector, so maybe it sort of behooves him to speak from that point. He's at a company that sells AI transformation, but everybody has their own position and situation that they're sitting in, which is why we have so many interviews. I take kind of for granted everybody's got a dog in the fight in some way, shape, or form when they come on the show. I've never blamed anyone for that. I have my own dogs in the fight, but my intended goal is to bring as many perspectives as possible. And I think that of the economic angle of competition and of simply being healthy, strong, able to innovate, able to act, that feels like a much more productive channel for national sentiment than that of sort of beating China in some military flex saber rattling way. It doesn't feel as though on the cusp of AGI, we should be positioning in that way, shape, or form at all. So appreciate Drew's perspective. We'll have plenty more in the US-China AGI Relations series as we move along, but you'll have to wait till future episodes for that. So stick around and I'll catch you here the next time on The Trajectory.